So see, both First Nations peoples and Europeans did messed up things with psychedelics. Hello my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance, it's Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, and this is Poison Magic. As I pointed out in my Indigenous Psychedelic Traditions video, while we often note the expanse of time that humans have used mind-altering plants and mushrooms, we also sometimes tend to ignore how they were actually used. We'll say things like, psychedelics have always been used for healing, or for religious revelry, or for community cohesion, and that's totally true. I mean, psychedelics were used for those reasons, but it wasn't always true. In my last video, I outlined the more brutal indigenous psychedelic traditions that post-colonialists would rather we ignored. But to show no favoritism, in this video, I'd like to go over some European examples of times when psychedelics or mind-altering plants and mushrooms were used for, let's just say, less than peace and love purposes. These usages are known in Latin as veneficia. We might call it psychedelic witchcraft. Before we get started, if you're into this kind of content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and find me on Instagram. And if you do subscribe, please, on that where it says subscription, hit the drop down and click on all so that you actually get notified when I post a video. The first thing to say is that in Europe, plants and mushrooms, especially mind-altering plants and mushrooms, were not illegal at all. Now, what a person did with said plants and mushrooms, that could be considered illegal. So a plant like henbane could and would be used for things like healing, divination, or to drive a person out of their mind by secretly giving them a high dose. While the first use, to heal, would probably not raise an eyebrow amongst the local authorities, the second one, divination, could if the client perceived some kind of harm had taken place. And the third kind, which we can call, for lack of a better phrase, bewitching, was definitely illegal no matter what. So again today, while we catalog drugs as either legal or illegal, our European ancestors cataloged actions as being either legal or illegal when it came to drug use. And sometimes intentions could get so conflated that we don't even know what to think. Such a clear case occurred around 1494 when Anna in de Grasse gave a man named Kernrat Koolman an apple to stew to cure his chills. The apple caused Kernrat to fall on the floor unconscious for 2 hours, knowing nothing, bereft of reason, senseless, and was no longer like a Christian person. In this case, a poison that was supposed to act as a medicine had the opposite effect, and Anna was tried for witchcraft. In early records, before modern herbalism had swept Europe through the mid-1500s, we can only guess as to what plants or mushrooms were actually being employed. For example, an English royal mistress named Alice Perrers found herself before the courts in 1376 for attempting to bewitch Edward III. One of the methods she used involved juice of powerful herbs. Now, we don't know what those powerful herbs were, but it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to consider that perhaps the mandrake berry was among them. Mandrake has been known as an aphrodisiac and mind-altering plant through much of European history. So while the records indicate that the juices were used for bewitching, well, it could have just been that Alice was trying to get Edward III's rocks off by giving him an aphrodisiac, only to have it blow up in her face. We also have some, and I emphasize the word some here, but some evidence of perhaps deadly nightshade also being used to similar effects. In 1611, a Styrian sorceress used the juice of a black berry, perhaps nightshade berry, to drive a man senseless. This would fall into our third category of bewitching that I mentioned above. Now, while it is probable that this sorceress used black henbane berries, I just want to be clear that we really have no way of knowing what she gave this poor fellow. However, an incident in which somebody actually died after eating nightshade berries led to a law being passed in Württemberg in the 1680s that was appropriately titled Decree Concerning the Partaking and Propagation of Nightshade. The law specifically targeted consuming the plant and ordered its immediate eradication. In another case from Württemberg, the year is not known, a woman named Johanna Fenlon drank a glass of wine at her wedding that contained white residue from a powder or herb. Soon after, she complained that everything in her whole body was turned around. She grew weak and could no longer stand up. Then, her head became so confused that she no longer knew where she was. A similar case from 1685 featured a young 16-year-old house servant named Anna Marie Rippin, who drank a glass of wine that had an unspecified ingredient. Anna suffered pain in her abdomen and then a stream of visions that she couldn't tell were real or false. Although she recovered, officials called her case an example of how simple women and girls are led astray into witchcraft. In Bern in 1509, 4 Dominican friars perpetrated a most sinister plot. A certain Dr. Stephanus and 3 others had decided that they were going to drive one of their lay brothers mad with some such poisonous potion. One conspirator dressed up like the Virgin Mary and actually started hammering nails into this poor guy's hands. He was placed on an altar in the church, while Stephanus, hiding behind statues of Jesus and Mary, carried on a conversation with this stupefied brother. The hoax was eventually found out and all forms were burned. In 1567, a more involved case involving these sorts of druggings of people took place in Gelders, Netherlands, by an unnamed physician, or at least he certainly had a name, but he's unnamed in the records. When Albert, who is the chief minister of a nearby castle, asked this physician to cure his sickness, the physician informed Albert that he had in fact been bewitched. "Worry not," the physician assured him, for he practiced secret methods of healing unknown to all other doctors. First, Albert had to cut the hair of everyone in his household, and that included all of the animals. He then had to give it to his daughter to deliver to the physician. Desperate for a cure, Albert did as told, and a few days later, his daughter showed up at the physician's house. This case is of particular interest because it demonstrates how a charlatan might use popular ideas about magic to mask a beneficium. Once arrived, she was taken in a private room where the doctor pretended to recite a lengthy secret prayer and then opened a book which was on the table and placed 2 knives in it in the shape of an X. This was accompanied by much mumbling and dreadful conjurations and the marking of characters of one sort or another. Finally, he drew a circle upon the ground and ordered the girl to stick into it one of the knives, cursed by him with adjurations. Then, after whispering some unintelligible words, he handed her the other knife to stick into the circle in the same way. Then, the true witchcraft was revealed. He gave the distraught girl a morsel to eat. After taking the morsel, she seemed to be disturbed and confused. She was losing control of her senses. Thereupon he commanded her to bare her bosom. After much kissing and fondling of her breasts, he threatened her father's death would follow most assuredly, and she herself would suffer the same malady, or one even worse, unless she complied, and he tried to convince her that a mutual contact of the flesh was required. So see, both First Nations peoples and Europeans did messed up things with psychedelics. Those are just a few of the ways that people would use psychoactive plants and mushrooms for bewitching others, or in ways that we would say are just not exactly in line with how we use these medicines in the psychedelic renaissance. The history of psychedelia is far more nuanced and complicated than simply saying that people have been using these plants and mushrooms for thousands of years. And in fact, there is very little uniformity in the historical record for how people use these things. They seem to use them in highly localized ways, sometimes for good or sometimes for ill, as we just saw, that made sense to them in their own time and place. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you this time, and I'd love to thank you for stopping by. If you found value in this content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and find me on Instagram. And until we meet again, I'm Tom Hexes, your psychedelic historian, reminding you that you free your mind by using your brain. Peace.